I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that change lives forever. My friend, thank you for being on the Life Shift podcast. My friend Ted is here. We actually have been friends for how long now? A long time.
Since the early 90s?
Yeah, 89. We met in 1989, right after one of my life shifts. And we went through that like best friend phases, right? We had like a couple moments of... Sometimes we weren't best friends, but I think every 8 and 9-year-old do that.
Yeah. And then we lost touch for a while.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because this was pre-social media.
Pre-internet.
And then pre-internet. Yeah, and then we reconnected in high school and then reconnected later with social media. So it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, it has. And we've kind of kept tabs since we reconnected. I think we were maybe 16 at the time when we reconnected. I think I called your parents' business and I was like, Hey, I'm in town. And your mom's like, I think I remember you. And then we got in touch and I think we went to play laser tag.
That sounds exactly right. That sounds like exactly something that we would do.
And your big pickup truck.
My big black pickup truck driving everyone around. So it was a different era.
It was. And it was only slightly awkward because we hadn't seen each other in 8 years. So like there's quite a little bit of development. Oh, maybe not 8, maybe like 6. A little bit between a 10-year-old and a 16-year-old.
Yeah. God, remember calling people's houses? That was so strange. I would never do that now. Just randomly call someone.
Right. Yeah. Or like randomly call your 3rd grade best friend's parents' business to say, exactly. Hey, I'm in town. I looked it up in the yellow pages and and here we are. And then we reconnected in our 20s, probably.
Yep.
We kind of, social media is great, but also you feel like you're connected, but we haven't really talked in a long period of time. Right.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, I think that you have the story from what I've seen on social media. I guess I should do that. You've gone through quite a transformation in the last couple years. And as a lot of people unfortunately have. And I think that your pivotal moment, which I'm not going to say just yet, a lot of people can relate to the trigger, if you will, myself included. Before we get there, I want to tell us a little bit about what you were doing before this. So like your career, where were you living? What was your life like before this moment? And then we'll hit on that moment.
Yeah. So after college, I moved to New York and sort of became like corporate worker person and like went through the agencies, worked for a lot of big brands. And it was very funny. I did that for 13 years before I moved to LA. And when I moved to LA, it was very interesting. I heard myself talking to people and saying things, when people would ask where I'm from, I would be like, oh, I live in LA, but I'm from New York, even though I'm really from Georgia. It became like New York sort of became this thing that I guess I identified with.
Yeah.
And it took a long time after I was in LA that I sort of stopped doing that. Like, oh, but I used to live in New York. And I would say that to people in LA, like, oh yeah, I live over in West Hollywood, but I used to live in New York.
Why do you think you did that?
I don't know. It was this weird sort of identity thing.
Yeah.
That I felt like that gave me, I don't know, some type of identity that made me different in LA.
Sophisticated.
Yeah, it was very strange. But I also felt like then I sort of did that same thing. Once I moved to LA, I got a job with a very large entertainment company.
Yeah, we won't say their name.
We won't say their name. And then I started doing the same thing once I joined that company. That sort of became my identity as well. So I'd be like, oh, I work here.
Yeah.
And people would be like, oh, I can't believe you work there, right? And then after that chapter was over, I remember saying, oh, well, I lived in LA and I used to work at this place.
Yeah.
And it was this really strange thing that, sort of only in hindsight that you can see that you're like, that was kind of weird that I sort of identified with like places and companies and whatnot, and sort of didn't have this, I don't know, wasn't comfortable necessarily just having my own identity. It always had to be like some place or something that had some kind of factor to it that other people thought was interesting or cool or whatever.
I don't think you're alone in that. I think a lot of people, I mean, you go to a networking event, anytime you go to, do people still go to those now? But if you do, that's kind of everyone's go-to icebreaker. And I just did it a couple minutes ago. Like, what do you do? Or what did you do? Because I guess in America, we're very attached to whatever that job position is that defines us more so than the person that we are and the qualities that we have, which I think is interesting in these conversations that I'm having on this podcast is we're really getting to like who people are. It doesn't really matter where they're from or what they've done. We all have these like through line experiences that are very similar that push us in different directions, but kind of creates a community of understanding. Your successes, although attached to certain locations and companies and those kind of things, probably led you to where you are, or you had that epiphany of, wait, that's not me, right?
Right.
I'm more than this position at this company, or I'm more than pretending to be from New York.
It is very interesting, just again, in hindsight, seeing those things and seeing how you sort of do those things and finding your way in the world and finding your comfort level with, this positioning, this jockeying for position, like you said, like at networking events. Those types of things are, for me, super awkward. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, here's this thing that I can hold on to. And then when that is gone,
right,
it's sort of like, okay, now what? What do I do now? What do I identify with now? And I sort of did that for a very long time.
Do you think that your journey, were you the type of person that you were in a position and you didn't sit in that moment and enjoy that position, but were always looking for something new? Or were you pretty content in being defined as that?
I was pretty content in being defined as that. And then when you have sort of outside forces that change those things and change that status, that's what really sort of rocks your world.
Right, because you're so entrenched in, this is me. Who am I without this? And I think people do that with relationships. They do that with friendships. They do that not just with job positions.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I did the same thing with relationships too, because I was married also during that time period where I was like, oh, this is a defining thing for me too. And that, again, in hindsight, looking back at that relationship was sort of like, oh, it was all about defining or showing and presenting what this is, instead of just being authentic and okay and comfortable in what it is. It's like, oh, it has to be the best, and it has to be this, and it has to be Instagram ready, and it has to, like, all of the things that come along with being in relationships.
That's an extra pressure, I guess, from, it is very much Instagram culture out there. And even when I went to visit you a couple years ago, I felt like we got to get the best pictures, right, for our social media to prove that we had a great time. Instead of, let's just have a great time and keep the pictures for ourselves.
Totally. Yeah, it's a weird thing, especially sort of in the age bracket that we're in, coming from the pre-internet piece, and now like sort of coming of age with the internet and all of that and the evolution of it. It's just a really strange position to be in, where you're like, oh, I want to keep up with the kids and I need to prove to everyone and I need to show them. When we're like, wait, we used to do this, and we used to go to laser tag in suburban Atlanta and be totally fine with it, not have to take a photo.
We sure did. We also used to, in recess or after school program, we used to be architects with pine needles. Do you remember doing this?
I remember this. Yeah.
So they had slabs of, I don't know why they had slabs of concrete out in, like trees, and Ted and I would grab pine needles and we would like structure, this is a room and this is the kitchen. I don't know why we did that, but I vividly remember that.
Look, I'm still doing that to this day. I just renovated a house, and literally I'm just like drawing it out. I'm like, does anyone have any pine needles? Because I need to like mark out where these rooms go.
It was great, and perhaps I should have gone into architecture because of that. But
You know what? I think about this a lot. I'm like, I wish someone had sort of pushed me in that direction or told me that this was even a possibility. Because, when you're kids, you don't know what you don't know.
right,
And
you're
like,
supposed to be a lawyer or a
yeah,
doctor.
exactly. But I wish I had known because I think I would be really good at it and I would really enjoy it.
Well, just so you know, there's still time.
I know. I knew you were going to say that. I wanted to be like, it's too late for me. That's not what the point of this podcast is it?
No, it's not, because we got all sorts of shifts. So let's get to that. So in the last couple years, you've really changed. So what happened to lead you to this change? And then let's talk about the change.
Yeah. So let's see. Where do I start? I guess I will start with sort of where I am now. Now after, living in New York, living in LA, working for these companies, I now live in rural Georgia on a farm. And like I'm building sort of a farm lifestyle retreat type of place on some property that my parents had. Never, ever would I have thought that I would be living back in Georgia, ever.
On a
Not that
farm.
on a farm. Not that I hated where I grew up, but it was just like, all right, I was done with that. I was moving forward. I was identified as a New Yorker, right? Then I was like a Californian, and now I'm like, wait, how did I get here? For me, I think about things, and I've often described this to other people, sort of like on a pendulum swing with life, right? And there are several specific moments, but for me, this was sort of like a 2-year cycle that started on that swing that was sort of going into like all of these, what I perceived at the time as being very negative, very traumatic, very impactful things that were happening in my life. One was being reorged, or the company that I was working for in LA, did a huge reorg, and my job and the jobs of like the people on my team were all of a sudden just not there, right? And that was something that was completely out of my control. And then all of a sudden, this thing that I had identified with,
Right. That was you.
yeah, was just gone. And it's like, okay, what do I do now? At the same time, the relationship that I was in that was so kind of this presentational thing, what completely like dissolved and was like a whole separate can of worms that was a different thing. And then at the end of that time period, that all happened sort of during this first year. Then we just got into the pandemic, and my dad passed away in the summer of 2020, not from COVID, but it was very sudden and something that was like, all of this stuff is happening at the same time.
Right.
All of these things
Piling up.
are happening to me, right? Like how I've done everything that I needed to do, and this is all happening to me. And like, how, what do I do now? So that was really one of those eye-opening experiences for me where I was like, okay, I've been just trying to like, not fight this, but trying to fix things along the way, as opposed to just saying, okay, what's happening? And the pandemic for me was like a really good opportunity because everything was sort of put on pause. I didn't have those distractions of like, well, I'm just going to travel and I'm just going to go here and I'm just going to see my friends and do all of this. And it was a great opportunity that when my dad passed, being like, okay, what is really important? I ended up coming back to Georgia because my mom needed help. My mom lives on this farm as well.
Oh, really?
And she needed help. I mean, we have a ton of acreage, we have animals, we have all of this stuff. And I'm like, well, I can do this now. I can financially, I have the ability. I'm very fortunate to have the ability to like not have to look for another job right now. And I can come and I can help my mom and we can like kind of figure all this stuff out. And then as things were unfolding, I'm like, oh, I'm trying so hard to identify with all of these external things. And what is it that I, makes the most sense to me? And sort of being back here, it was, kind of whatever you believe in, if this is the universe or whatever, just lining all of these things up for me that sort of cleared the path. Like I didn't have to worry about this toxic relationship. I didn't have to worry about a toxic work environment. I didn't have to worry about impressing other people. I didn't have all of that stuff was just gone.
Right.
And it was like, here you go. This is sort of what you should
Yeah.
be.
Blank slate.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like,
Right. Because we always make, oh, I can't do that now because
mhm.
XYZ. And now it's, you had no because.
Yeah.
You had an opportunity.
So it was an opportunity that, yeah, in the summer of 2020, I came here and I was only going to be here for a month, 2 months. And then we all know how things, unfolded with the pandemic. I ended up staying
Right.
for like 6 months. I owned a house in LA. I went back to LA. I ended up selling my house. I ended up getting remarried and moving back to Georgia to, build this farm, take the infrastructure that my family already had here. We have
Mm-hmm.
property, we have houses, and it's like we can make something out of this. And I'm very fortunate to have a partner who is super supportive, super excited about doing these things. And it's not about doing these things for other people. It's about doing things that's going to set ourselves up for what we want to do and be able to sort of build a lifestyle and play and experiment and do things that we've never done before. And it's super fun and exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time, because we don't know what we're doing, but we're just sort
Right.
of figuring it out every day.
Which is, what we all should be doing in life, right?
Yeah.
Is going with what feels good and what feels right, and is not harming others.
Hmm.
I think that's important. And what a shift from LA culture
Yeah.
to bring a partner to a farm life and a renovation life. Because I think it looks like an HGTV type
I know.
adventure that you are on. Does it feel like that?
It does. It definitely feels like that. We definitely keep saying we need to sell this as like a series, but Ben would I think we would both go crazy with cameras being around, but because we're literally trying to figure it out. Like, Ben has never like lived in a rural area before. That hasn't done like a bunch of the stuff. I know how to do some of this stuff from growing up, but
Right.
like,
You know how to operate heavy machinery.
but just because for some reason that's just what I did growing up.
Yep.
But like, we're building a beehive, we're building things out of wood, and like we're just, I don't know,
Pizza ovens.
we're building, yeah, we're just like making it happen and kind of having fun and being like, what can we do today? All right, this sounds great. Let's do this.
And you wouldn't be able to do that. And you would be identifying with, I am on a TV show, and so I need to present
Right.
whatever feels like I need to present. Whereas now you can do whatever you want within reason,
Yeah.
and you're building something that you can be proud of, which
Yeah.
I think is super cool. And I think I love watching the Instagram and seeing what you guys are doing. Maybe you need a couple more bloopers on there or things that go wrong, but
Exactly.
beggars can't be choosers.
Exactly. And the good thing is too is that my mom is here. She lives in a separate house on the property. So as she's getting older and as she's going sort of through this big life shift as well,
Right.
of
Because your parents were married how long?
for like 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my dad was someone who was very, as very strong-willed, very controlling, very loud. Like, he was sort of the boss in a very traditional sense of, I'm the husband, I make the decisions, whatever. And my mom was
Mm-hmm.
just very much used to going along with that. And
Right.
it's this really strange dynamic of me being here. And, I know a lot of people go through this as their parents get older, this dynamic of like the kids sort of taking care of the parents and all of that. But my mom is still independent. She doesn't need full-time care. She has all of this property, all of these animals that she takes care of, but she's still, I think because she's been conditioned for so long to have someone take care of her, she doesn't necessarily know how to make decisions on her own.
Mm-hmm.
Or she knows how to make the decisions. That's
Right.
unfair. She doesn't want to make the decisions. So
It's harder.
yeah. So a lot of it defaults, to me, like, what are we doing? Where are we going? How are we doing this? Those things. And I feel like I'm making a lot of those decisions and kind of helping her, which I'm happy to do. It's just this very strange dynamic when I'm I haven't been used to working in sort of that type of environment. And I feel like now that this is my full-time job, building this farm, taking care of my
Right.
mom, taking care of the animals, and it's great. It feels a lot more fulfilling and purposeful than say, working in a corporate environment. Right. And so
Well, do you think you would be here doing this at some point in your life had your father not passed?
I don't, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that that was really the catalyst. That was sort of the thing that was the culmination of these kind of 2 years of what felt like chaos, right? Of like this
Right.
scrambling of like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now that I'm not
Right.
identified with this job? What am I going to do now that I don't have this relationship? What am I going to do? You know, all this stuff. Now the pandemic's happening. What am I going to do? Like it felt very chaotic. And I think had he not passed, I probably would still be scrambling because I probably wouldn't have come back, even though with his health and my mom's health, they probably would have needed the help. I think I probably would have solved the issue with throwing money at it, getting help
Right.
to come here, like those types of things that are very traditional, very hands off, like I can't get involved type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And you know what? I talked to someone the other day that had a similar loss. She lost both grandparents and both parents within a 18-month span. And we talked about it, which is interesting because I've lost two important people in my life in different points of my life and really shifted things both times in crazy ways. But we talked about how such terrible moments or things you would not wish on anyone else, like the passing of a parent or multiple people in your close family, how you can look back on it and weirdly feel grateful that it happened without feeling like a jerk saying that. But I mean, I've had these conversations in which people are like, if you could go back to 1989 and stop your mom from doing XYZ, would you? And at this point in my life, I'm grateful that I don't know how to say it. I'm not grateful that it happened, but I'm grateful for the experiences that it has allowed me to have.
I completely understand that. Yeah, I identify with that. I was able to see sort of that silver lining really quickly.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, my dad and I didn't have like the closest relationship. Like we didn't talk about my relationships with other people. We're on opposite ends of the spectrum as far
Right.
as, politically and socially and like all of that stuff. And now he tried very hard. He's just of a different era. He was a Marine, right? Conservative, like all of the things that come along with all of that. And here I am, living in LA with a man, you know what I mean? Like it was like, yeah. So, for me, it was sort of, it was different in the fact that I saw all of the doors being opened from all of the stuff that had happened to me, right? Of, not having a job that I had to worry about and not having to worry about trying to find another job, not having to worry about getting out of this relationship or navigating this relationship that wasn't supportive to me, right? Like all of that stuff had already been cleared in the year prior. And so I was sort of like, oh, I can do this, right? Like, and for me, I was like, that was where the silver lining came in for me. It was like all of this other stuff happened in order for me to be able to be here and be present and help my mom and do the things I needed to do. Now, in the summer of 2020, I didn't know what I was going to do here, right? I didn't know I was going to move back here and renovate a house and all of that, but it gave me the opportunity to sort of breathe and think and kind of just experience the local culture and help my mom through this kind of time too. So it was, I saw it very quickly. It wasn't a thing that I was like, why is this happening? Why did this happen to me? It was like, oh, all of this is happening for a reason. Right.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because earlier you said you can see the shift in the perspective because you said this happened to me and then this happened to me. And then something about the loss of a family member, whether you're close or not, changes your perspective on everything.
It
right?
totally, that's exactly what happened. It was sort of that culmination of all of these like really like bad negative things happening,
Right.
that it was like, oh, okay. It was sort of like a light clicked on for me. That was like, oh, I'm trying really hard. And it was funny. There was another time period that I had got another job. This was after I came back to Georgia. I'd got another job and I was working remotely and doing all of that stuff. And the structural stuff changed and that job ended up being gone as well. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm really trying hard to like get back into this corporate lifestyle when the world is like, no, you don't need to be doing this. You need to be
It sounds
focused.
like life was pushing you in a particular direction.
Totally. And it's been great. It's changed my relationship with my mom. It's changed my relationship with, my husband now. It's just like, it's made me more open, as opposed to like sort of chasing these things that were filling voids,
Right.
being more open to talking about things, to being more direct about things, to being less concerned about pleasing everyone, which, is a habit that I think a lot of people get into. And again, it goes along with what we were talking about earlier with sort of this presentational style of, Instagram and social media and everything's great. It goes way beyond that. But all of these things was like, oh, it allowed me to, sort of be more open in that respect and say, no, I don't want to do this. I want to focus on this. I want to take my pine needles and make a pine needle house. You know what I mean? Like, and that's
Right.
okay. Right. I don't need to justify that.
I feel like the shift was really, there's no more need to prove yourself.
Yeah.
You are fine however you are, and you can approach and do whatever you want. And I think so many of us, myself included, feel that we need to prove something to someone, whether it's our parents, it's our friends, it's our bosses, it's the world. And just to get back to these moments that we forget that we're just human and we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. I was talking to my friend Kristen on this podcast, and I really liked, she talks about people going through these moments, and the first piece is radical acceptance of yourself and other people. And I think it was so profound, just saying, I'm okay however I am at any moment in time. That is okay. And with more experiences, I can do better if need be, or if I choose to. So what do you think about radical acceptance? Do you feel like you have that now?
I definitely feel like I have that. I've talked a lot about, I think I learned more about myself and was more open in 2019 because of all of those things that had stacked up. And this was ahead of my father passing away, that like, I was like, oh, wow, I've done so much emotional growth and this sort of radical acceptance of what's going on, of, in 1 year. It was like 10 years worth of growth because I just sort of like bottled everything up. And that was forced upon me by external circumstances, right? Like I had to do that. It was like either that or be like a hot mess, which I probably also was at the same time, right?
Which is totally fine.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the radical acceptance piece, I definitely identify with. It just, I think prior to 2019, I was just trying to fix everything and stay afloat with everything and present as everything's great. And when you sort of have that piece of like, it's okay to not be okay, right? And all of that stuff, it becomes a lot easier. It becomes a lot less of a weight on your shoulder, right?
Do you think all these moments help you accept your partner differently than you may have 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
100%, 100%. And I mean, we have, I've never had a relationship where I've been able to just have the sort of radical candor and talk about things without feeling like, oh my God, if I tell this person how I'm feeling, they're going to judge me, or they're going to leave me, or they're going to whatever. We have that just great communication style that we can both say that. And so I appreciate it so much more. I don't think I would have appreciated it or fostered it or, participated in it the way that I am now 5 years ago. I just wouldn't. It just wasn't something that I was used to doing. I was just used to acting the way that I was acting and, and doing the show for everyone.
Do you think that's common in LA and New York, of the people that you were around or interacted with?
Yeah. I think it's especially prevalent, not to be stereotypical, but I think it's especially prevalent in LA.
Mm-hmm.
I just experienced it a lot with when I was working. People were very interested in, me and what they could get from me because of where I worked. And then when I didn't work there anymore, that sort of dried up. And I noticed that really, it was very overt. Right. And so, but I do notice I still, when I see friends that I know, like on Instagram and whatnot, and like I see people presenting all of this stuff, it really makes me angry. And I literally just have to say it out loud. And I have to tell Ben, I'm like, this is really bothering me. It has nothing to do with me. It doesn't affect me at all. But I see this and it like enrages me to the fact that I'm like, why are they doing this? And I'm like, I just have to realize and to like take a deep breath. I was like, this is not about me. Doesn't affect me. Doesn't have anything to do with me. And I think it's because I just see that characteristic that I used to do. And like, it's a daily process that you have to sort of work through. It's not something that all of a sudden just goes away. And I think that's why it bothers me so much too. Cause I'm like, oh, and then there's this ping of jealousy as well, where I'm like, oh, I wish I was doing that,
And that was the whole performative component of it back in your previous version of your life.
Yeah.
I wonder if the pandemic has affected other people, not, in the loss of a family member or just in general of the pause, of the slowdown, of the spending more time with ourselves, really. I wonder if there will be a shift in that, or if it's just like when we get back out there, it's back to performing.
Yeah, I hope so. I think so. I really hope so. To me, I am an optimistic person, but I'm sort of pessimistic now when it comes to social media and this performative nature. And I think it's just because I've spent so much time like thinking about it and trying to overcome some of that myself, right? That sometimes I don't have a lot of faith that it's going to change, right? And then I saw people posting stuff that have like complaining about things like that are so inconsequential that also you don't need to be putting this stuff on social media about just complaining about like personal things that are happening to them. I'm like, this is such just a waste of time and space and energy. And that's where I get like all worked up about it. So I'm like, I'm hoping that there is the shift. And I think that for a lot of people, there's been so many people quitting their jobs and moving different places and doing the things that they always wanted to do, which I think is really great. And I think that that's what we need to continue to support, is not being defined by a place or a company or these things.
I imagine that that anger and that getting upset just comes from two places. One is you get angry that you used to be that way.
Yep.
But also the other part is you wish you could impart what you know now on those people and be like, look, this other side is so much more authentic and I'm loving life at this point because of this, kind of shift.
That's a fine line too, between trying to be like that savior complex, right? It really is. So I'm like, why am I still engaging with these things that like trigger this in me?
Right.
Why shouldn't I just stop engaging with this content or with these people? I don't know. It's a fine line. I'm like, also, is this just something that I'm like so voyeuristic that I just want to see what's going on because I'm out here on a farm in Georgia, which I chose to do, right? Which I love, right? So it's complex.
But here's the thing. I imagine that those people that you may have those fleeting moments of jealousy about are having the same thing by seeing what you're doing.
100%.
So, I mean, it's all there. It's so interesting. And I think the same to your point about you can't be a savior, right? And it's very similar to someone that has lost someone. Like, you lost your father. I lost my mom and my grandmother, and my friend lost her whole family. And we're all going through grief, right? But we're all going through it at a different stage. And so, some of us dive head first. When I lost my mom, like, it literally took me like 20 years to finish that grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't tell, like, someone could have said, well, this is how you should do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to work. Right. So I think it's the same kind of thing as when you see other people being very performative, part of you probably wants to say, like, snap out of it, do something different. But they have to find that on their own timetable. And whether that's through a good experience or a bad experience, that's life, right?
Yeah. I found it very interesting after my dad died that people would, give me advice or tell me about
Unsolicited.
grief, unsolicited. And the biggest thing that made me, it was just weird because I had never experienced this before. There were multiple people who would then tell me their sort of grief story and their traumatic thing that had happened to them, or their traumatic thing that happened to their cousin's friend, and this. And I'm
Right.
like, and I mean, this was literally like in the days after my dad
Right.
passed. And I was like, I don't want to hear this. Like,
Right.
I don't,
It's not helpful.
It's not helpful. And I understand that it came from a place of trying to empathize and trying to say,
Correct.
I understand, what your feelings are. Here's what happened to me. But it was so strange because it was like telling me this like gruesome story about something that I'm like, okay, that's not helpful to me. But all you can sort of do is like, I understood the place that it was coming from. Right. So
Right.
I'm like, okay. And then just sort of like remove yourself from that situation. And then it happened over and over again, like probably happened like 5 or 6 times with a variety of different people who are my friends,
Right.
people who are my parents' friends. And I'm like,
Right.
it was like multi-generational stuff. And I was like, oh, this is really weird. But for me, that was I took that almost immediately again as a learning experience of like, oh, when someone else is going through this, here's what I shouldn't do. I shouldn't tell you what happened to my dad, right? When you're going through this, just to try to empathize. Now, I think there's a scale on that, what that looks like.
Right.
But
Of course. I've obviously gone through the same thing, and I feel like I'm not comparing right now. I'm not pointing that out.
I know.
What I've learned from that, because you're right, people are going to give you the unsolicited advice of how they did it or how their situation was so much worse or whatever it may be. And what I've learned from it is if I find out something like that, I reach out, I say, I am here. And my piece of advice, which maybe is not warranted or wanted, but I always tell them to feel whatever they're feeling and be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think some people are so, so-and-so died. Well, why isn't that person crying all the time? Or why is that person still going to work? Or why is that person laughing? And these moments, all of that is okay, because guess what? You're still a human and you're still living and you're still doing these things. And so that's always my piece of advice, which is, I don't go into detail or anything, but I'm like, just be okay with wherever you are at whatever moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I learned from having, an experience as a kid, because when you're a kid and someone dies, it's a whole other story. And then when you're an adult, in a lot of cases, it's worse, right? And so people just think that they can give you all that. So hopefully that helps you moving forward.
Yeah, it was funny too, because my mom would, I was here for, a good 6 months after my dad died. And, my dog went with my ex because I just like got up and left, came here. And so I had all this like resentment building too of, well, all of this is, again, still trying to work through it, right? Of like, this has all happened to me and I've literally like flipped my life upside down and now I'm here and like, I need to get some credit for that type of thing that I had to sort of like work through that too, because that felt very weird. And then I felt like, a teenager again, sort of sometimes lashing out at my mom and whatever. It was just, it's a weird, very strange dynamic as an adult and sort of this like kind of role reversal, if you will, type of thing.
Yeah. It reminds you that you're human. I think it's okay.
Exactly. And like I said, it's okay to like feel that. It's okay to feel that resentment. It's okay to feel exactly how you're feeling and whatnot.
Yeah, you just have to honor it, I feel like, and not live in it for too long.
Mm-hmm.
It just acknowledge it. I'm feeling this way. I mean, even now, just on a regular day, if I'm having a rough day, I'm like, it's a rough day. I'm not trying to like make it a beautiful smell the roses kind of day.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an off day, and that is fine. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So it's easier here being very remote because if you're having an off day, you can just like chill and not see anyone. Just
Right.
go out in the woods. I spent a lot of time
Yeah.
hiking in the woods by myself. So it was great.
That's amazing. No, I think it's great. And before we talked, you called this your life revolution,
Yeah.
which I think is really like right on the nose, because I've known you at different stages of your life, and I feel like I'm just like peeking in at different stages, and I've seen like the kid stage, and then I saw the teenage stage, and then I saw your New York phase,
Mm-hmm.
and then I saw your LA phase, and so now this is our opportunity to see your Georgia phase, or
Yeah.
your return to Georgia phase. So I think it's quite a revolution. And you are seemingly happier
Yeah. I
and
feel
lighter.
really great. Yeah, that's exactly it. I feel lighter. I feel like I know what I'm doing, and I feel like the work that I'm doing and the things that I'm focused on are for building a future, not only for myself, but for my husband, for my mom, for things that I want to do, as
Right.
opposed to doing stuff that, again, talking about the resentment, like sort of in the corporate world when you're doing
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And I would sit in meetings and literally just like roll my eyes, just being like, this doesn't matter. This is
Right.
so stupid, right? And everyone's
Right.
getting real flustered and worked up about something that I'm like, it's so inconsequential. So it feels like all of that is sort of gone, and I can kind of direct my life and where I want to go and what I want to do. So I'm super happy about that.
And I can see it. I can see it, and it looks good on you.
Thanks.
What would you say to either your 2018 self, so before the pendulum started swinging, from the perspective that you have now, or someone that's going through the stacking of feeling like the external forces are all happening to me?
Hmm.
They're attacking me. Do you have any? What would you say?
I mean, I think my biggest piece of advice it would be to really try to do things that get outside yourself, right? And this might be sound cliche, but like go and do something that like helps someone else, right? Or
That
like,
actually matters.
yeah, exactly. Or like makes you super uncomfortable, right? And that could be as easy as like volunteering somewhere of something that makes you uncomfortable, but like push yourself into areas that make you feel uncomfortable. I was super uncomfortable talking about emotional things. Like I literally just would not. And
Mm-hmm.
everything was sort of like the show and the presentational piece of it. Right.
Right.
So, pushing yourself to go to therapy or go, someplace that makes you uncomfortable to help someone else. Or if you have a bad relationship with your family or your whoever it is in your family, go be there to help them and like really like pushing yourself. That helped me so much. And like in the fact that it was sort of forced,
Mm-hmm.
like all of these circumstances happened that I had to deal with all of this stuff.
Right.
And it was tough and it was challenging, but it took a while. But I think that is helpful for people to get in that practice because it's just not something, it's like working out. You have to have practice doing it, right?
Someone said, "Get comfortable being uncomfortable,"
Yep.
because those are the moments in which you grow,
Yeah.
and things can change, for the better, hopefully, but things will change.
It's placing yourself in those places that make you uncomfortable, I think, is really the next step. It's like, great, I can say that. I can be like, yeah, I'm going to
Right.
be comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm going to deal with my emotions. Or you can actually be like, let me physically plop myself down in something that it's like super uncomfortable.
Yeah. I love it. I am sorry for your loss that triggered this, but I am happy to see what you've done with that experience and where it's taken you, because I
Yeah,
think you
thanks.
you literally took what do they say? Life by the horns or something like that. You're on a farm, so there's probably some horns there, but you really took advantage of having that empty plate and a new perspective, and you're creating what brings you joy, which I think is so important. As we've talked about this whole time, so many people just kind of go from one thing to the next and do what they think is expected of them, instead of really sitting in and going, what brings me the happiness? What brings me the joy? And I'm so happy to see that you're doing that. And I'm so glad that you've shared it.
Yeah, thank you. And I want you to come and visit.
Yes. Well, that's going to happen at some point.
Yes.
Hopefully this year. I'll drive to the mountains and we'll check it out. But anyway, I just want to say thank you for being a part of this. I think your story is going to resonate with other people in multiple ways. But I think seeing what people do when something major or multiple things happen in a row and how they grow from that, I think is super inspiring. So I appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's good to connect with you.
Right? We'll have to do it again when the next big thing happens for you.
For sure. Before that.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll see you in the next phase of your life, wherever that is. All right. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You've just listened to the Life Shift podcast. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information about how you can support the Life Shift podcast, please visit www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. See you next time.